Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Wolf, and if you are interested in the occult, just like I am, then you have found yourself in the right place, because recently I have picked up Necromancer in Guild Wars 2, as I've been going through the game and teaching my girlfriend how to play MMOs in general. So as a result, I started a new character and had to work from fresh, and I've never played a light armor class in Guild Wars 2 before, so I kinda had to start putting some fun stuff together, and I have made two very powerful early game builds, that one of which requires a little bit more effort than the other, and the second one you could probably turn your monitor off and more than likely be fine. So I figured I would show them to you guys since you enjoyed my early ranger leveling so much, and I figured I would get this out right before I head into Diablo 4 and have a very good time with that. So, with that, let me showcase to you my Necromancer setups. So, let me show my HUD, and this is going to be a mixture between staff and scepter dagger. One is condition damage based, and one is power based. You can use a mix between pretty much any necromancer weapon, especially with the second setup, because I wanted to mess around with everything and see what worked and what didn't. Overall, pretty much all of Necro's stuff is quite good for leveling, as well as the Reaper Shroud gives you a lot of survivability, or the Death Shroud rather, giving you basically a second health bar. So, let me showcase the setup for you here. So, this is going to be our trait line. Of course, I'm on level 46 at the moment, but even so, I've kind of planned out where I'm going to scale this up when I eventually level. And yes, of course, I could just auto-level myself to level 80 if I wanted to, but I figured I would go through and have the authentic Guild Wars 2 leveling experience, because we don't really do that very much nowadays. We just auto-boost ourselves to 80 and forget the rest of the game. So I kind of wanted to enjoy it the old-fashioned way and unlock all the transmogs and cool stuff that comes along with it as well. So allow me to explain kind of how the build works. I'm going to go through the fast-paced version first, and then I'll show you the very simple version afterwards. There may be some overlaid gameplay on screen because I was killing champions and doing all that sort of stuff solo with some of these setups. So if there's anything like that, then, you know, don't worry about the screen fading out, what have you. You'll probably hear my luxurious voice in the background. So, let's get started. The Necro Staff is the weapon I was primarily looking forward to using, and I wound up creating a relatively interesting setup based around it. So the way this staff works is it puts down marks. So that's going to inscribe something into the ground that is effectively an AoE trap. So what happens is when an enemy walks into this, it'll trigger, otherwise it'll stay there for its normal duration. And a lot of these things will give you conditions or other added effects. In the case of the staff, you can do a long-range 1200 range projectile that can pull most enemies for you, allowing you to group stuff up very easily. And then you can follow that with your Mark of Blood, which will give you some very easy bleeding on a very short cooldown. This is your primary sort of pull tool and damage tool on the staff. And then we have Chillblains, which will give us poison and chilled. So these are our two kind of easy access condition damage or power damage if you want to go down that route options with the staff. It is more of a utility weapon, but I wanted to make a staff spellcaster, and I found that this works quite well. But where things get very interesting is Putrid Mark. This is our fourth ability on the staff. Describe a mark that damages enemies and transfers your conditions to them when triggered. Now, you see it gets more fun when we swap to our secondary weapon set, which is Scepter Dagger, because the Dagger offhand has Deathly Swarm on the exact same keybind, so it's not even that difficult to memorize either, which is unleash an insect swarm to blind and transfer conditions to your enemies. Now, this is where things get fun, this transfer condition element, basically. Because what it allows us to do is utilizing corruption spells, which is something the Necromancer has access to, unlike any other class. You can weaken yourself and envelop the target area in a noxious cloud, or, in the case of Blood is Power, bleed yourself to grant might to allies around you, that includes you this time, and bleed your target. Now, this will self-bleed you as well, right? But it gets better when we add in some of the other augments from, say, curses, for example, in our specializations. Obviously, if you don't know what specializations are, I'll give you the quick rundown. You can go into your training section here, and you'll be able to train your specializations and your skills and what have you. And when you come into your build section, you can select one of 6 specializations, and you can have 3 at any given time. In this case, when we are leveling, I started off with Death Magic, and then I went into Curses. I'll explain the Death Magic simpler variant in just a little bit. But the Curses option gives you access to more condition damage stuff and more bleed options. So, for example, the Bard Precision increases your bleed duration, and we're going to be bleeding with the Scepter basic attacks, the auto attack on it, and the secondary attack, but we're also going to be bleeding with the Staff, and we're going to be bleeding with Blood is Power. We're also going to be bleeding ourselves with Blood is Power. And so, it's going to give us increased bleeding duration. But as we make our way through here, your first attack after entering Shroud transfers conditions, and then we have Master of Corruption, where things get really, really fun. Your corruptions gain reduced recharge time and inflict additional conditions on you, meaning that Blood's Power is now going to torment you, right? Which deals damage to you, but deals increased damage if your foe is stationary. They used to be flipped around. You used to take more damage if your foe was moving, but Torment was so shit in PvE, they had to literally flip it around to make it a viable condition damage stat. So, as a result, most enemies will be stood still if you're fighting, bosses or what have you, but most of the trash will be running at you, so it's kind of a loss in damage, but what can you do? But the primary use of it is that it gives you an additional self-condition, basically. We're necromancers, we're emo, right? We kill ourselves. But point is, this gives you an extra thing that you can transfer to a large pack of enemies with your Putrid Mark or with your Dagger Deathly Swarm. So our opener, generally, is going to be Blood is Power to bleed ourselves with 1200 range. Excuse you, ma'am? To bleed ourselves with 1200 range, and this will bleed and torment ourself, whilst also giving 4 stacks of bleed to the enemy. We then follow that with Corrosive Poison Cloud, which is an AoE, which we can put down very quickly, and that will pulse poison to everything, and you'll see that it also weakened us as well, and does a self-cripple. The self-cripple is a little bit annoying, but of course we're going to be transferring it away with Deathly Swarm or our Putrid Mark. So the reason we do that is Blood is Power has 2 charges. So if you're dealing with any particularly difficult enemy, you can Blood is Power, Corrosive Poison Cloud, and by the time the animation for the Poison Cloud is finished, you can use your second Blood is Power. This is going to give you 8 stacks of bleeding on the target, and then 4 stacks of both self-torment and self-bleeding, which you can then transfer away via the Putrid Mark to then completely cleanse yourself and put a heavy amount of bleed and conditions on enemies pretty much instantly, resulting in very, very good AoE clear. And surprisingly, the staff does enough power damage, you can sometimes just kill things with Reaper's Mark because it's the highest damage ability on the staff. So this allows you to also have a significant amount of control, because since you have Fear on the staff, you can use it to sort of fear things back into the Poison Cloud. Because most of the time, if you put the Fear in the right spot, say for example I put the Fear here, and I'm the enemy, for example, the enemy's probably going to run away, right? So if you put the Fear here as our primary area, the Fear will send me running off this way, right? Now, I'm not 100% sure if that's the case, but from my testing and my little experimentation, that seems to be the way it operates. So we can do a little bit of zone control, right? We can set up our marks and our Corrosive Poison Clouds in a way that it forces enemies and, trash mobs and what have you to walk back into the clouds or into our elite, which is going to be Plague Lands. This is going to create a massive AoE around you that will pulse a shit ton of conditions. This is going to self-poison and self-bleed as well. So if we want to do a massive AoE of stuff, we can stack all of our AoEs all together. I'm also running with Well of Suffering here because it's just extra AoE damage. So we can wind up dropping everything all at the same time in a massive group that we've pulled together via our long-range Necromancer staff. And we just go 1, 2, and 3, and everything around us is going to die. We then put down the Putrid Mark over top of it once we've aggroed everything, and that Putrid Mark will transfer all of the conditions that I put on myself from the Poison Cloud and the Plague Lands to anything that is standing around me. And to cover yourself in case you fuck up, because this happened to me once or twice, we're also going to run Consume Conditions, because there will be some times where you Blood is Power something and it crits and the thing dies, and now all of a sudden you have 4 stacks of Torment, 4 stacks of Bleed, and you're going to kill yourself. And Consume Conditions will allow you to eat those off you and heal yourself. However, unfortunately, it will self-blind as a result of the Master of Corruption, which is not particularly the greatest thing in the world, because that means your next attack's obviously going to miss. So I normally run around with Signet of Vampirism, which will passively life siphon enemies' HP and slowly heal you back. That can also be augmented through the the Blood Magic tree, which is where I would go next for my final piece of this build, because it gives you access to more marks. So we will drop a blood mark when we dodge roll, which will allow us to get even more bleeding, for example. And then we can also start to get Signet of Vampirism here, which casts a lesser Signet of Vampirism when you inflict bleeding on a foe that already has at least 3 stacks of bleeding. This is where things start to get very, very, very good. I mean, unfortunately, it has a 16-second cooldown, so that's going to be single target sort of primarily, but that'll give you extra healing as well. And you get the survivability to stay alive through the Death Magic line and the final point in your Curses tree, which is Parasitic Contagion. So a percentage of your condition damage heals you. So 5% of all of that bleed that you're going to be throwing on people, or 5% of the poisons, or all of these conditions, is going to be healing you. You can also run Lingering Curse, but I haven't messed around with this too much yet because I've been preferring to stay on staff, and I'm looking forward to converting this into Harbinger later down the line and utilizing the pistol, so that's not going to be a great option there particularly. But if we go into Death Magic, it gets even more fun because we get access to Death's Carapace, which is a stacking buff for 10 seconds that will give you 17 toughness, or toughness scaling based on your level, obviously. And what this will do is, with the right upgrades, we can make it so we lose a condition when you enter Shroud, and every few seconds while you're in Shroud, and then you gain Carapace when removing conditions from yourself, right? This is where things start to get really fun. I found this interaction kind of by accident because I was using Death Magic for the minion setup, and then I looked at it I threw it in here before I went into the other trait lines just because I had it already finished from leveling earlier, and I created a very stupid interaction, which allows you to get to 30 stacks of Death's Carapace, which is the maximum amount, whilst leveling at level 46. Which is very, very stupid, because it results in a scenario where you have a lot of toughness, and thanks to the next trait option, Carapace stacks will also grant you power. So you get plus 10 power at 30 stacks, you get 300 power pretty much instantly, just from doing the above combo that I told you beforehand of Corrosive Poison Cloud, Blood is Power, Poison Cloud, Blood is Power, Transfer, gives you a shit ton of stacks. And then it gets even better because the final option for this is Corruptor's Fervor, which inflicting a condition on a foe grants Carapace. So yeah, gain Pulsing Protection while at or above the 25 stack threshold, giving you 33% reduced damage, and of course, we're going to be inflicting a shit ton of conditions just by dumping our entire kit on whatever decided to look at us wrong. So as a result, we're going to have a heavy amount of power, buffing our staff marks, since our staff marks do scale with power. We're using them mostly to apply conditions and do the condition transfer. But the flat damage will scale with power, allowing you to have even more damage whilst you're leveling. And then of course you'll take reduced condition damage while at or above 10 stacks. So that's just going to be reduced damage from the self bleeds, and then we will get increased life force generation, and our kills will also grant Carapace, and we can chain these kills relatively easily once you start using your marks to pull stuff from long range and figuring out the combos. So yeah, that is the Necromancer setup that I have been running and having a relatively good time with. It is a little bit more on the active side, but it keeps you on your toes because you have a very simple game plan and 2 primary abilities that you want to kind of play around, right? So you can use your Mark of Blood, your Chillblains, and your Reaper's Mark relatively interchangeably. Reaper's Mark you want to use when you have 30 stacks because it'll do a heavy power burst on whatever it is you're trying to hit, and also that Fear will break bars and save your ass a couple of times. And you can obviously go into your Shroud and use Shroud 4, which is a massive AoE as well, to give things the big suck, and do a bunch of damage that way. And, Reaper, or Shroud 5 is nice to combine with that as well for a nice AoE burst. But yeah, otherwise you're going to want to play around the Deathly Swarm as well. Same button, 16 seconds and 15 seconds, so relatively the same cooldown. So you can build the habit of, okay, I have one of these up, that means the other one's probably up as well, so I can dump my corruptions and then transfer it. The other thing you can do later into the game when you start to fight enemies that don't die in one shot will be Epidemic, which is going to apply vulnerability to you, but spread conditions on a target foe to all nearby foes at a reduced duration. I would replace Will of Suffering with this fella, or potentially the Poison Cloud. I'm not entirely sure just yet, but that's probably what I'll be running in later game fractals, because I am going to try and scale this up and see what I can do with it, because that'll allow you to get a lot of AoE. Obviously, you're going to want to dump all your conditions, transfer everything, and then Epidemic to spread it to the entire pack of trash, or whatever it is you're killing, and work forward from there. So, that is the faster paced setup. What about a slower paced setup? Say, for example, you don't have hands like I do some days when I haven't got my coffee in me. Well, what do we do in that case? Well, I have a very simple minion setup here for you. This is what I was running until I decided I got bored of it and wanted to switch it. And there is a specific reason that I don't have the second one in. It's because you realistically don't need it. I could probably go into a level 45 to 50 map right now with just this setup and be perfectly fine. So what this basically is you go into Death Magic. You go into the minion option, you just pick everything. And all you do in Death Magic is you pick up minions have increased health, gain carapace for each minion you control. That is going to be passive toughness. And then you'll have minions deal more damage and take conditions from you. So if anything decides to attack you for whatever reason, they'll take them off you. And when a minion attacks, it transfers conditions to its target. So it'll steal the conditions off you onto your minions and then transfer them onto the enemies. And then you'll have Death Nova, which is when you or one of your minions is down, create a Poison Nova, and summon a Jagged Horror when you kill a foe. That final part is the most important part because you can get 5 additional minions, leading you to having 11 minions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus 5. You can have 11 minions basically doing your bidding for you, coupled with passive toughness from Carapace stacks, since you'll be able to get Death Carapace from summoning all of your minions. So let's pop these little fellas up and make all these boys. And of course they'll follow you and stay right beside you all the time. And what's also cool, if you're using a raptor, if you hop onto your raptor, your minions will disappear. But if you hop off your raptor, whether using your raptor attack skill or just dismounting, your minions will appear on top of you instantly, which will result in a very nice burst of damage to have a bit of minion control. The minions do have some actives you can use if you really care, but honestly, I can just autopilot and auto-clear maps without really having to worry about that. The only one I would really micro is the Shadow Fiend's teleport, because this will allow it to teleport and do a big AoE based off of whatever you're aiming at. The charge for the Flesh Golem is also useful for CC or break bars or what have you. Combine that with the staffs, Reaper's Mark, or Fear, break bar, etc., etc. But yeah, that is my very, very simple Necromancer setups that I have been having a relatively good time with. So do let me know what your guys' setups for leveling Necromancer is, and I hope you stay tuned for some of the other Guild Wars 2 stuff that I'll be having after my hopefully very deep foray into Diablo 4. Thank you guys for watching, and if you want more Guild Wars 2 content, do take a look at some of the other playlists on the channel, as I have covered a lot of Guild Wars 2 stuff in the past. That's all for me, and as always, take care, fellas.